The world of football with a soccer perspective. This is Soccer Today with Duane Rollins and Kevin Laramee, live on the Sports Podcasting Network.
Good day, good night, and welcome to Soccer Today for Tuesday, November 12th, 2019. I'm Kevin Laramee, joined by Duane Rollins. As always, this is our last show before our post-MLS Cup break. We're going to be gone for about a little bit over a week. We'll be back Friday next week. But Duane, it's we have 2 annual breaks. We usually take like a week in the summer and a week in the fall, and it's the second. We actually go through Christmas. We talk about soccer during Christmas, but this time of the year, we take a little break.
Yeah, we usually take maybe 3 days around the Christmas time, the day of and all that sort of jazz. But it's needed to refresh the batteries. The end of the MLS season makes a lot of sense for us, and it's kind of vaguely at the end of the European season as well, when we're like kind of and need a little break after Sunday's escapades in Seattle. It's a big build up to that, and then I know that we're the US-Canada game has kind of fallen in the middle of it this year, but we sort of had to figure out when to do it. It also, works around our own schedule. We're going to talk about US-Canada today, and we'll obviously have any fallout from that coming back when we come back from the break. But I hope you forgive us for our, we only give you 240 or so shows a year. So, I think we can probably.
And it's more than that when you add the Two Solitudes. And before we say goodbye for a break, we're actually bringing you a bunch of content as well. If you look on the Two Solitude Soccer Podcast, our premium podcast here on the Sports Podcast Network that you can find on our Patreon page, patreon.com/Sports Podcast Network, a sit down with Commissioner David Klenick last Saturday at the U Sports event here in Montreal. 20 minutes, no holds barred conversation with the commissioner. I suggest you go listen to it. Expansion Talk, Ottawa Talk. We talk about the future of the CanPL, playoffs, draft, a lot of great conversation with the commissioner. And later today, Duane and I will have an interview with the CEO of Media Pro Canada, Oscar Lopez. So that'll be a fun interview available on our Patreon page as well later today.
Yeah, exactly. And if you want more Fury conversation, I know there's a lot of people talking about that. There was some bonus coverage that dropped over the weekend in reaction to the Ottawa Fury situation, which we'll probably touch on again today in Two Solitudes as well. Unfortunate situation. That's the TLDR of it. But we talked, Duane and Kevin talked a lot about it, the immediate aftermath of it. And, we'll touch about it more this afternoon.
That's the bonus now of being self-employed by here at the Sports Podcast Network, is we have breaking news audio whenever big news will happen when we come back from vacation. U.S. men's national team, Canadian men's national team, part 2. It is the second leg. Canada's last game in the Concacaf Nations League group stage. Duane, and it's a big one. It's for the top of the group. It's for World Cup qualifying. This game is big on Friday.
Yeah, I mean, this is arguably the biggest game Canada has played since probably the last cycle when they had the opportunity to go through with a win. But the difference is that this cycle, this one feels a little bit more possible, and they're also in the driver's seat in the sense that a draw would also send them through. Part of that, the math it's hashtag math, as we all know, and we don't want to belabor that too much, but the draw would win the group and provide Canada with 2 more opportunities to play games in this format, which would be at a 0.25 multiplier. In fact, it might even be a little bit higher because they're finals games. I'd have to confirm that, but certainly a 0.25 multiplier, which would allow them the opportunity to really control their own destiny. They won't necessarily clinch anything with the win on Friday. Curacao is the team that I think I know the team you're going to have to look out for. They've been quietly sort of creeping up and are right there as well with Canada. They also have the potential with the right results this week, I should say, to win their Nations League group. There is a possibility. It's not even that remote, Kevin, that both Curacao and Canada would both win their groups, which would mean that the semifinals, third place game / finals of next year's Nation League might actually decide the final hex spot. That would be certainly something. I was talking to some people the last viewing about how, had this potential idea that the third place game in the Nations League could be Canada v. Curacao, and that would actually be the most important third place game ever played because it could actually decide it. But lots to play in between. it's one of those danger banana peel kind of moments, I think, for Canadian soccer. We've had a lot of them, and we typically have this uncanny ability, Kevin, of finding the banana peel. Doesn't matter where it is on the street. We'll cross the street, dodge traffic, and just to slip on it. So we'll see. I have this fear that they somehow lose a tough game, 1-0 or something like that, play well, and that won't matter because essentially then you're relying on Cuba to pull an upset to have the chance, and
which will never happen. No, and of course going forward for Canada, the best way to achieve result will be to control its own destiny, and the best way to do so is to win games. And this Friday is one that could be winnable as well. It's on the road. It's in Orlando. It's at the Orlando Stadium, and it will be fascinating. No Kyle Larin for Canada. Only 2 changes for John Herdman's squad so far. Dwayne Dominic Zator of the Canadian Premier League is in. Also, David Witherspoon of St. Johnstone FC in the Scottish Premiership is in. Juan Cordova and Russell Tybert are out. Of course, Russell Tybert, it's an understanding decision by John Herdman. He hasn't played in a month already. And one of the early decisions. Of course, Samuel Piatti is in the same type of scenario. The Impact did not make the playoff, but he is in this roster. And it's also his birthday, so a happy birthday, Samuel Piatti, today.
Yeah, it's going to terrify me to know how old he is. He's 24 now or something. It seems like he's been here for more.
He made his debut at 17 for the Canadian men's national team. I remember walking around the halls of Fédération Soccer du Québec, and there's a big plaque poster laminated in the article about Samuel Piatti with his baby face at 17 years old, making his debut for the national team, full team.
Yeah, I know exactly. With 7-year veteran of the national team, and he's still a kid. It's that shows maybe my age to call a 24-year-old a kid, but nonetheless, it's still pretty young.
That's true.
Anyway, yeah, no, it's look, that is a factor though. Piatti not playing for a month. Also, if you look at the U.S. roster, a lot of their players have been, maybe not a full month out, but have been sitting, without playing much meaningful soccer in a while. It's a weird one to handicap. It really is. I mean, it depends, I guess, on your perception of what happened last month at BMO Field. Did an up-and-coming young team, give its first notification to the world that it had arrived and was a real player in the region, or did a wounded animal slip up again, right? And maybe it's somewhere in the middle. Either way, how you handicap this game in the United States in front of not very many people. The last we looked, the ticket sales were around 9,000 people, so it's not like it's going to be a rowdy, driving atmosphere in Orlando.
So it won't be a hostile environment in Orlando, which that stadium hasn't really been one for the Lions, for the Orlando Lions as well, but it's probably because the team hasn't been good. But you're right, looking at this U.S. men's national team rosters, Daniel Lovitz of Montreal Impact fame is in this roster. DeAndre Yedlin and Sergino Dest will probably make his debut for the U.S. men's national team against Canada or maybe Cuba. This is the roster for both game for U.S. men's national team. Alfredo Morales of Fortuna Dusseldorf. That's an interesting name for U.S. men's national team. But when you look at the roster, one name is glaring by its omission, and that's Chelsea's very own Christian Pulisic, who has started scoring with the second team in the Premier League table. And right now, they decided to maybe keep him with Chelsea so he continues to score and not play for the national team this go-around.
Yeah, that he certainly has gone on form since he was invisible last game. And they're going to make choices like that. And I think it reflects just as much as when we're looking at the U.S. program from, that sort of informed outsider perspective, what we see is pitchforks. It's basically people like trying to, climb over the walls and take people hostage because they're so angry. But inside the program, I think what you see is patience more than many fans want to see. And when they look at a game like this, it still ultimately means a lot more for Canada than it does for the United States. It allows them to build upon this system that Greg Berhalter wants to build, and it allows them to make decisions where it's not life or death. They're in the hacks. They have a year to figure this out. They might even, deep down in their own psyche, prefer not to play in the finals of the Nations League because no one really cares about the competition as its own. it's a hex sort of qualifier for teams like Canada, like Carousel, like Panama, El Salvador, those teams, that it matters a lot to them because of what it means qualification wise. But in terms of the actual championship of the Concacaf Nations League, I mean, it's not like anyone grew up with a burning desire to win a competition that didn't exist till 18 months ago. So it's...
Are you saying that, I don't know, Jonathan David has not been dreaming for the last 10 years of scoring the goal in the final that clinches the CONCACAF Nations League for Canada? What? That's not a thing?
No, but well, probably not. Like, don't get me wrong. Canada qualifies for the semifinal stage. We're going to watch those games. Part of our curiosity will be, well, we wouldn't mind making a final. It's been a long time.
Seeing Canada raise a trophy, I don't care. It could be the North Star Shield of the Canadian Premier League, and you have the Canadians actually raising the trophy. I would be happy. Just seeing my national team raising a trophy is something that I've never seen with my own eyes. Of course, 2000, I was not around this community, but it would have been a good time.
Well, that's what I was going to say. Like, if on the men's side of the game, you're looking at a 20-year gap before they last did anything of that note. So it certainly would be something worth celebrating onto its own. But really, the prize is the hex. And like I say, for a country like the United States, qualifying for the final, they may wish to book friendlies at that big. They may think it's better off for them to go to Europe and play a couple games against bigger nation opposition than it would be to play Mexico again. In fact, they have nothing to win, really, because I don't think they'll be ready to compete with Mexico come March, and losing again to their rivals might hurt them more than it helps them.
Yep, that would probably... I would think that actually losing to Canada would actually give people the realization that, it's a closer matchup than we anticipate, and the U.S. men's national team do have to be at least focused that their spot in the region is not for granted. And I think for a long time they had that mentality, and I say they as the U.S. Soccer Federation and people in places and position to take decision on rosters and stuff, that it was always going to be eternal, the second spot at least in the CONCACAF region, and top when Mexico is on a great cycle. So you always had that. But now with the rise of Costa Rica, other teams, and maybe even include Canada in this, it's not for granted anymore.
No, well, I mean, I don't think it ever has been for granted that they were long-term going to hold this spot, other than the wealth of the nation. That is really what allows the United States in many ways to hold on to that position. And at times, I think in the early part of the 2000s, you could make the argument that they had bypassed Mexico, at least at that very period of time. But of course, the soccer infrastructure in those two countries is such that the Mexicans eventually did find their way back to their natural place. And look, when it comes to the U.S. in this game, if they were to lose to Canada again, I have a hard time believing that there's going to be a moment of reflection when American fans go, oh, maybe Canada's caught us. No, it'll continue to be, what are we doing wrong? Why are we losing to, quote unquote, crap teams like Canada? And I'm sure that within the Canadian cycle, within the Canadian team, that there's a lot of quotes on the dressing room door, because when they lost the game last month to Canada, there was very little self-reflection, very little understanding or expectation that the result was Canada winning. It was the U.S. losing. And, I have seen a few of their players, Mark-Anthony Kaye most notably, saying, like, what's with the disrespect here? Like, we're here. We're right here. You didn't lose. It's not Luxembourg losing to Spain. That's the analogy I keep giving to people.
That's a good one.
It's more like Switzerland beating Spain. That's
which is surprising, but not totally out of the realm of possibility when you think about it.
Yeah, exactly. And I said Luxembourg losing to Spain. Of course, I meant Spain losing to Luxembourg. That's where we're at here. And look, we've earned our history. We've earned our reputation over the years. Canada has struggled. Obviously, the U.S. has been good. Their hubris has been earned a little bit, but it will be, it's really for them, as I said, about the process, and they're not going to look at this result as anything other than they're failing if they fail to get the victory.
And we'll see on Friday, and it should be an interesting matchup. If you're John Herdman, the tactical matchup here on game number 2 versus the U.S. men's national team, Do you think he's going to approach it differently? Are we going to see a Cavallini start on the bench again? Or maybe Cavallini does start, and this one being a player that is playing right now in a regular week in, week out situation in Mexico. There's that. There's the Jonathan David also, and Alphonso Davies. 5 straight start with Bayern Munich. Great complete games. He's being touted as a great left back right now with Bayern Munich and in the league. His performance are top of the league right now as a left back over the last few games in Germany. So when you look at the roster of the Canadian men's national team and the recent tactics of John Herdman, how do you find a way to make sure you have Davies, David, Cavallini on the pitch at the same time?
Well, we talked about this last month as well when I did interviews at MLS or for Extra Time on MLSsoccer.com and things like that, where I said that if you're candidate to me, you have to lean into your strength and find a way to get them all on there. The tactics Herdman came up with were very front-footed. Now, whether he does similar on the road is going to be the question. I again, will argue that I don't know how you do it. He's getting the big bucks to figure this out, but you do have to find a way to take the game and to be offensively minded in the game, because I don't think that if you sit back and absorb, you can't play like Seattle did in MLS Cup final and expect to win this game. Canada's strengths aren't really light up that way. They'll make a mistake at the back if they let the U.S. dictate play too much. So really, I think if you're Canada, you just have to find a way to get on the front foot again, regardless of who starts his games. Cavallini, he offers a different look, and you can make the argument with the speed that they have out wide and the talent they have in the wide positions that Canada might want to do that sort of switcheroo kind of idea where they can have that look for 50, 60 minutes and then have the ability to bring a guy off the bench, which just creates a different kind of a problem for a then tired U.S. backline. So maybe they do something like that where Cavallini starts on the bench and is able to have a major impact coming off of it. Look, there's the other issue I think I have a bit of concern with when it comes to Canada is what mental strength, what mental abilities will the two guys from TFC have going into this game, coming off of what would be a pretty devastating loss for them, right? Do you maybe sit Osorio in this game because he's played a lot more and he might be a little bit beat up? We might not even know. Obviously, mentally, he is fatigued. You just can't help not be, right? Gear it all up, and then to do it again in 5 days is a lot to ask for any player. So maybe that's a position there that you look at to do a bit of a switch from last month. But at the same time, he's a player that's on form right now, so you have to consider that as well.
Yeah, that's very true, and we'll see the results of this on Friday, 7 p.m. Eastern Time in Orlando, USA versus Canada in the Concacaf Nations League. Right now, Canada is top of Group A in the Concacaf Nations League with 3 wins after 3 games played, 9 goals for, 0 goals against for Canada with 9 points. USA, 2 match played, 1 win, 1 loss, 7 goals for, 2 goals against for a differential of +5 and 3 points. The last team in this 3-team group is Cuba. 3 games played, 0 win, 0 draws, 3 losses, 0 goals scored, 14 goals against for a -14 differential and 0 points in Group A.
Yeah, and if you're looking at Cuba doing anything in this, I mean, I guess you can make the argument that they do have it as the home leg, and they were much better, even though it's not home, they were much better against Canada than they were against either of them, the United States or Canada, when they were playing the game in the Cayman Islands. But I would not go into this if you're Canada hoping that you can get some kind of help from the Cubans. You just can't. If they were to pull something, then great, but that is not what you want to be doing come next Tuesday.
No, absolutely not. And all that you want is a point. A point at this stage is enough to make sure Canada is top of Group A, but it's not enough when we look at the CONCACAF rankings that are based on the FIFA rankings for the Hexagonal Championship next year. And that's where a win versus a draw is very important. Nothing to do with the Nations League, but the win with the differential, the ratio, the coefficient, 2.25, whatever it is, that gives you a bonus of FIFA points. That is why Canada actually needs a win on Friday. But on that note, Duane, let's take a quick break. When we come back, let's talk about Major League Soccer, a couple of big news, and I have a big rumor to tell you that you don't know about after the break as well. So we'll be right back after this short break.
You are listening to Soccer Today. Follow us on Twitter at SoccerTodaySPN and like our Facebook page, facebook.com/Sports Podcasting Network. You can find the podcast version of all the shows we do on iTunes, Apple Podcast, Google Play Store, TuneIn Radio, iHeartRadio, and anywhere you get your podcast.
You like to hear Duane and I talk about Canadian soccer, Canada, Canadian Premier League, MLS teams in Canada, and more in depth? Well, make sure you go to our Patreon page, patreon.com/sports podcasting. Let's work $2 a month. We'll give you access to the Two Solitude Soccer podcast, which right now on that feed you have a sit down with David Klanikan, Commissioner of the Canadian Premier League, and later today you will have an interview with Oscar Lopez, CEO of MediaPro Canada. And speaking of Canada, here's the bomb that I have for you right now. Duane, this comes from Sofiane Benzaza, well-known soccer journalist, friend of the show. We had him on before, and Sofiane does a great podcast that you can find everywhere you find your podcast. Sofiane is hearing that, according to his sources, Ignacio Piatti is staying put in Argentina definitively. That makes a lot of sense when we see that a few days after the end of the season last year, he moved a lot of boxes and trucks and leaving. We don't know if that truck drove to another house or drove to the airport, but probably to the airport. Apparently, Ignacio's time with the Montreal Impact, according to Sofiane's sources, has come to an end.
It's unfortunate, that a player of his stature doesn't get the opportunity to get a proper goodbye, although they did have when he was carried off the field type thing by his teammates.
Jeez, I was there. They did. All the teammates walked from across the field to give him to shaking his hand, and they said after the game, well, we don't know anything special, but we didn't want to miss the occasion. Yeah, it felt like a goodbye to me anyways.
Yeah, no, I mean that seemed to be like an indication to me that it probably was the answer. I'm sure that the Impact held out some hope that some kind of deal could be made where potentially he would sign a one-year contract, a one-year extension of some type that maybe allowed him to move in the summer and they could then have him in play for the CCL. But honestly, I know it's unfortunate from a Champions League perspective that he won't be part of that. But if you're going to move forward as the Impact, to me, you're better off now knowing what's happening. You got a few months to figure something out. You got a few months to maybe potentially bring another DP in, and you can start fresh for next year. To have a situation where it's questionable all year whether he's going to stay, maybe he's coming in, like I said, in some kind of like wink-wink deal where they're going to move him in the summer. It doesn't seem like the right play, and it was never a good time. Just like last January, there was no good time to say goodbye to Sebastian Giovinco as a TFC fan. There's no good time to say goodbye to Nacho Piatti if you're an Impact fan, because these are players that in both cases had a legacy that was really quite profound for their club and will be very difficult to replace even at their advanced age. That said, you look at, Piatti over this past season, and he wasn't on the pitch a lot. And that's a lot of money to be sitting off. Now, injuries can't be helped, but when you get a little bit older, you have to factor that in. And if he wants to go back to Argentina, I don't think there's really much you can do, or you should do, even if you're the Impact. You go, you throw something at him. You go, you're sure you don't want to play 1 year? This is what we can do for you. And then if he says, no, I want to go home, then I think you just accommodate that, and you hope that maybe you could work a way to have him come back in June and wave to the crowd, right?
Yeah, well, Kevin Gilmore, president of the Montreal Impact, did mention last year that they were picking up, last year, just a few weeks ago, mentioned that they were picking up his option for 2020, and that's when he left the postseason bilan, the end of the year press conference. Yeah. So he left without talking to the press. That makes a lot of sense. And you add all those things together, gives a lot of credence to Sofiane's sources today. So that's one thing. Also, since yesterday, the trade window is open in Major League Soccer. one trade that we knew was coming, we heard about it last week. It is official. Dax McCarthy leaving Chicago to Nashville. He will be their core, their identity, probably their captain for their first season for $50,000 of general allocation money, $50,000 in targeted allocation money, and a second round pick in the 2021 Super Draft for the Chicago Fire.
Well, and let's hope that those, for Chicago's sake, that Tam and Gam exist in a few months. But I'm sure that there's provisions within that. I mean, I don't know what. Well, I guess they just convert it to money. Is what they would do. There'll have to be something. It is that said. That might put a damp cloth over any trades that happen right now. Is we're talking about the CBA negotiations and the potential that they might not have those acquisition methods moving forward. So they'll have to work those into any trade that happens right now. But it's a decent move we talked about this already, but it's a decent move for Nashville to bring a veteran in like that they can sort of build around. It's not a long-term play. Dax has been around a long time now. You can't see this. It's Parkhurst, as you mentioned. It's like a veteran that you can bring in that gives a bit of the MLS culture to some of those guys that you try and build around otherwise. I'll be very fascinated to watch Nashville's build because they kind of seem like a tweener to me.
Yeah.
What I mean by
like not Minnesota, but not Atlanta.
Yeah, they're going to have sort of the ability to be exactly a tweener. That's the way I'd put it. And I think a lot of us are waiting for the schedule to come out so we can circle that away trip to Nashville because it does seem like it might be a fun place to go for a weekend. But
yeah, it's true. Yeah, it's like when Vegas will have a team. Well, like, okay, let's go for a weekend. Why not?
Exactly. I know. I think the NHL writers are still talking about the Nashville Stanley Cup run. It's a team you forgot about too, right? Like Miami's coming in. They're the one that everyone's going to be watching and looking at. Well, maybe Miami's coming in. God only knows what that.
There's a logo. There's probably going to be a stadium eventually, but we've been talking for Miami for so long that I won't believe it until the first ball is kicked in Miami, or at least in Florida.
Exactly. Well, yeah, I don't think they're going to be in Miami proper to start.
Fort Lauderdale. I guess it's going to be the Inter Miami of Fort Lauderdale.
Exactly. And the rumors that are being tied to them, David Silva is being tied to them. Of course, Manchester City, a legend really there. And I think that that would be a very interesting move to bring into Major League Soccer. He still has a lot to give in the Premier League. So I think obviously he could bring a lot with in MLS. But like any team, like it reminds me a little bit of NYCFC's launch, really, right? Like kind of how they're building things. And NYCFC's launch wasn't horrific. It wasn't as bad as people think it was, I think, in hindsight.
Well, remember, Orlando was at the same time, so they always had Orlando to make them look a bit better than they actually did. But you had Pirlo, Lampard, and David Villa, so it wasn't that bad.
Yeah, well, 1 out of 3 ain't bad, right? Well, it was 1.5 out of 3, basically.
Lampard's a half, and Pirlo's just the guy that I will always remember as just standing on the far post looking at things happening around him.
Yeah, and I have a feeling that Miami is going to be very similar. That, I think David Silva, if he's not too small for MLS, and that would be the question with him, would be a player that I think could come in and do some things. Now, his game kind of relies on having big parts around him that he can feed into. So is he going to have that at an Inter Miami if in fact he comes? I don't know, but that's the type of player that seems to be linked to Miami, and I think that's the type of player that's always going to be linked to Miami because when you talk to big European footballers, they think MLS is 3 cities basically. So, and one didn't exist till now.
Yeah. So I want to come to Miami, LA, or New York, or Miami. That's it. MLS. All right.
Yeah. Maybe if Chicago ever got it stopped. I don't even think they think of Chicago though. Like
they don't know, but Chicago it's going to be amazing. What if it's going to be interesting to me? And that trade of Dax McCarthy, giving him one pick for next year in the second round, but more of the money. It's not a lot to start your rebuild, but it's a start. Speaking of a start, Miami also. So the 2 expansion team already made some moves in the transfer window that opened yesterday at noon. I thought it was midnight, but yesterday at noon. So basically just after the show, these things were official. Victor Ulloa from FC Cincinnati have been traded to Inter Miami. So here's from MLSsoccer.com. Inter Miami have acquired midfielder Victor Ulloa and the first pick of the 2019 MLS re-entry draft, the stage one, the one that no one really wants, the stage one, from FC Cincinnati in exchange for $50,000 in general allocation money, a 2020 MLS Super Draft third round selection, and the 26th pick of the 2019 MLS re-entry draft, stage one, the club announced on Monday. He's out of contract following the 2019 season. Lua signed a new deal with the expansion side of Inter Miami already. Victor Lua will be a big piece for Miami.
Yeah, it actually, that's a weird one. Again, let's hope for their sake that the re-entry draft still exists in a few months. But I kind of get it from their perspective because you have the ability to add a salary that might not be ideal because you're going to have a lot of extra sort of things that you can use in the first years. That's the unspoken about these expansion teams when they come in. You know, we all love the build that they did in LAFC and Atlanta, but they were also given some advantages that disappear after a while. And we'll see what their long-term sort of outlook is after they lose those advantages. Miami's probably looking at this and going, well, yeah, there might be some bets out there that we can really think will add a job, but they're overpaid by $50,000 or $60,000, but we can use some of our allocation to pay those down so their salary is reasonable on our books. Whereas a team like Cincinnati can't do that. Cincinnati spent all of its extra stuff stupidly. They were like a kid in a candy shop.
Nick Haglund, $400,000 of allocation money. Just the perfect example.
Yeah, they had Mike and Ike's for dinner when, and no money left over for the pasta, right? That's essentially what happened to FC Cincinnati's build. So, yeah, they have no use for the re-entry draft, I'm sure. And Miami, as I said, might be able to utilize that. And I actually like it. Look, Nick DeLeon was TFC's first round re-entry draft. And obviously he had a major role within TFC's build this year, like sort of reload this year. And you can get players of that caliber in that first round draft if you're willing to pay them. You have to have the room on your salary to do so. I'm sure that DeLeon was affordable because they had, the money from Vasquez and Javinko's sale, right? So now they'll have to figure that and move forward. And I'm sure Miami, with the provisions that they have the ability to do a similar thing. So that's a pretty smart trade, actually. We just talked about how Miami might be a little bit, Euro focused. So that actually is a fairly, in my mind, a savvy move. Again, caveat, we don't know how anything's going to happen in this offseason based on the CBA.
And the re-entry draft, who knows if the Impact is going to maybe buy back the contract of a Maxi Urruti or something. And yeah, that would be a way to get rid of it if Miami has more money and more like mechanism to use that money to benefit them versus players that have a higher salary that no other team would be interested in. That could be a good way for, I see the Impact in Urruti, but it's other teams in the league to dump a high salary in a player that is not wanted for the future. Maybe Miami is going to be a suitor for this. The last thing I want to talk to you, Duane, about before we say goodbye is the Darwin Quintero situation in Minnesota. It all started earlier yesterday. Darwin Quintero on his social media, Instagram and Twitter, writing a famous now notes, right? It's when you have something to say, you go in your notes, you screen cap, and you post it on social media saying that Minnesota has not picked up my option for next year, so I'm going to be free and I'm going to leave Minnesota. A few hours later, Minnesota like, no, we're actually picking up his option. We don't know what he's talking about.
Well, yeah. We get into player options versus club options and all that sort of good stuff here. And this is all the intrigue of this offseason because I think the players are going to be flexing their muscles in terms of their movement rights a lot more, probably by the direction of their union to do so. And, I don't blame them because the MLS contracts are, yes, they're collectively bargained, but to a player that lives in a global market, it becomes increasingly difficult to justify some of the lack of flexibility that they have within Major League Soccer. And if MLS is to reach its next stage, it's MLS 4.0, so to speak, it's going to need to address these issues. And we'll see how this plays out. But not a good start to Minnesota's offseason, to say the least.
No, not a good start for their best regular season ever in Minnesota. And this offseason, we'll see if they can continue the momentum. And maybe Quintero has some value, so saying you pick up his option and you find a way to move him is the way to go for Minnesota so you don't just lose him outright. That could be part of this. This could all be negotiations just on a public platform, which we're seeing more and more on a regular basis in sports, especially in soccer in North America.
No, well, precisely. As I said, I think there's going to be a lot of flexing in the next couple of months. And we've alluded to the CBA a lot in the last recent couple months, but it's all we're going to be talking about, I think, for a couple months until it gets dealt with. It's a weird one. They do have that lead up to Christmas. I think that's going to be the key. This is an earlier off season than we're used to. We're not even sure when the season's going to start again. There was some talk that it would start at the start of February rather than the end of February next year.
Yeah, somewhere like in the 20th of February, I anticipate.
Yeah, so we'll see whether they take a little time off there and what they do. But I would suggest that if there's a real desire to get the CBA dealt with, that they'll want it done by December 25th, which gives them a little 5 weeks now, right? 5 weeks to Christmas, folks. You might want to get shopping if you haven't already. Yeah. Although I'll wait till 5 days. It's fine.
And there's a few dates that are interesting if you're looking at the CBA thing. December 31st at midnight or January 1st at midnight. That's when January 31st at midnight. That's when the CBA is coming to an end. And if on February 1st there's no work stoppage declared on either side, so no lockout or no strike, it is written in the CBA that after February 1st, 2020, automatically things will go on using this CBA until a new agreement has come to pass. But at least no work stoppage is possible after that date of February 1st, 2020. A lot of fine prints in the CBAs when you read them.
Yeah, well, yeah, anyone who's been in their own CBA situation knows that there is a de facto thing that happens when your CBAs run out and there isn't a new one in place. Then you work under the assumption that you're still living under the same rules, but you're at that point in the position where you could have a strike or lockout vote, right? So we'll see, and we're going to learn our labor law in the next few months. Welcome to the third time. This is my third CBA, so I'm all hat at it now.
Yeah, we're used to it. We're experts now. Exactly. On that note, Duane and I will say goodbye for soccer today until September 22nd, next Friday. Not this week, Friday next week. I'll be back in Montreal, back in the studio, and we'll be back on Soccer Today to talk about the world of the beautiful game from a soccer perspective. On that note, make sure you follow us on Patreon, patreon.com/Sports Podcasting Network. Later today, we have an interview with CEO of Media Pro Canada, which is the part owners of One Soccer, amongst other entities in the world of sports. Oscar Lopez will be on the Two Saw Dude Soccer podcast later today. For patrons only, $2 a month will give you access to our bonus coverage of the beautiful game in Canada. But until then, for Duane, I'm Kevin. We wish you a great week and especially a great soccer.
You can find the podcast version of all the shows we do on iTunes, Apple Podcast, Google Play Store, TuneIn Radio, iHeartRadio, and anywhere you get your podcast.